The One Piece world is in shock after hearing the startling news from Dr. Vegapunk that in the very near future, the entire world will sink into the ocean. We see the Marines in a panic, the everyday civilians in disbelief, the world nobles furious, and the Gorosei desperate to stop the message. And this is all just off the reveal from the last chapter. We haven't even gotten into any of the new juicy info Vegapunk gives us in 1114 yet. Like, for example, some major hints as to what's going to cause this catastrophic event, which, to no one's surprise, it will be entirely man-made. Also, there's a big reveal about Joy Boy, or at least big to us readers. To most of the people in the One Piece world, just finding out he existed is going to be the big reveal. And yet, despite all of this, my biggest takeaway from this entire chapter is seeing on page 12 that Lilith is still alive. You have no idea how big of a sigh of relief I had at that moment. I have been very open about the fact that Lilith is the Vegapunk that I most want to make it off the island, and considering how she was with the members of the crew that were actively avoiding all the danger in this arc, her survival stocks were looking really good. Definitely much better than the real Dr. Vegapunks. But they took a severe nosedive once we saw that Saturn had climbed his way up to the Labo phase in 1112 and continued to fall throughout all of 1113 and the first half of this week's chapter. Like, dude, the second I saw Saturn charging at Lilith in this chapter, I thought, alright, this is it, game's over. I'd given up all hope she'd make it off the island and was ready to transfer all of my remaining stocks over to Atlas. But surprisingly enough, Saturn just ran right by her. So once again, my favorite Vegapunk is safe. For now, since the Gorosei have decided to go with the nuclear option and eradicate every living thing on the island, only time will really tell what's going to happen with her. But unless Oda plans on having this whole rescue Vegapunk operation end in absolute failure, things actually are looking back up for Lilith. She's one of the 4 remaining satellites. Actually, now there's only 3, now that Edison's essentially sacrificed himself, I think. That scene we get of him definitely felt like a death scene, but it's not exactly clear if he actually is dead now. But even if he's not, odds are he's way too damaged to make his way back to the Straw Hats, so this is most likely the end for him. And you know, it's kind of fitting that this chapter's cover page revealed that the favor Kinemon asked of Yamato was for her to deliver Yasui's sword back to its previous territory and place it at Enma's shrine. You know, a sort of final homage to a sacrifice from back in Wano, in the same chapter where Edison does essentially the same thing, just without as much of an emotional impact. But now that he's basically crossed off the list, we only have 3 Vegapunks remaining: Lilith, Atlas, and York. And unfortunately, Atlas is currently the one in the most danger, as she is front and center with Venus. Sure, Sanji, Bonnie, Frankie, and 2 Giants are there with her, but she's still the one out of the 3 Vegapunks who's currently in the most danger. And considering that Venus is actively trying to kill Bonnie, more than likely that means that Bonnie's the only one out of that group that's actually safe. You know, not counting Sanji and Frankie, because obviously being 2 members of the Straw Hats, they're not going to end up dying. Which means that any one of those 2 Giants or Atlas could end up dying in Bonnie's place in order to save her. So yeah, we'll just have to wait and see if she actually ends up making it out of this. And I do want to be clear, even though Lilith and York seem like they're safe now, there's no telling if they'll make it either. Because with the elders going into a panic and deciding, you know what, fuck it, let's just kill everything here and deal with the fallout later, they could very easily get caught up in a rampage. And so could all the Marines currently here, and that's something I think everyone I've seen talk about this week's chapter has completely glossed over. The Gorosei said, let's kill everything. Doesn't matter if you're an ally or enemy, if you're not a giant yokai, you're in their crosshairs. And again, this is all just a reaction to Vegapunk saying that the world is going to sink into the ocean, which just goes to show how desperate they are to keep this info hidden from the everyday people, who a majority of the chapter spent showing us the reactions of to this news and the mention of the Void Century. We saw a lot of familiar faces like Paulie, for example, bringing back flashbacks to when I thought he might end up joining the crew, but the 4 that stood out to me the most were Imu, Sakazuki, Kuzan, and Shaoria, who, if you don't remember, that's one of the first world nobles we ever got introduced to. Imu is an obvious one. They already know everything that Vegapunk is saying is true, and considering their silence in this chapter, it really makes you wonder how they'll react to the 5 elders failing to stop this message from playing out. Like, I'm actually nervous for the Gorosei, and I didn't think I could be. Then there's Sakazuki and Kuzan. I'm mostly just curious what they'll choose to do with this information, more so Sakazuki than Kuzan, because he's been an obedient lapdog for the world government since basically his introduction into the series. So once he knows that they're going to cause the world to sink into the ocean, will he just continue to sit back and follow orders, or will he end up rising up against the powers that be? But hands down, the most interesting reaction to me was Shaoria's, because unlike all the other celestial dragons who are just angrily shouting over Vegapunk's message, she's actively listening to what he's saying. Hell, she's not only listening, but actually trying to make sense of it. Which really makes me wonder, are we going to see a change in her character going forward? Like, once she knows the truth about the Void Century and what's even going on today, will she end up being against it? And is she the only one? Will there be more members of the world nobles who end up turning against the world government because of all of this? To me, that is the most interesting part of this entire chapter, much more interesting than the whole Joy Boy reveal at the end. I don't know, maybe I'll be alone in thinking this, but I'm not sure I like the idea of Joy Boy being the world's first pirate. It just doesn't really jive with the idea that I've had of Joy Boy this entire time. But the news is still fresh. Maybe once I let it sit for a bit and we get more info about him and his adventures, I might turn around on it. And speaking of turning around, that's exactly what Luffy does in this chapter, as he ignores both Dory and Broggy's warning and decides to throw a big punch at Mercury, which once again just ends up hurting his hand instead. But this time he's in Gear 5, so it's much more serious that he landed a punch and was the one who ended up hurt. And keep in mind, it wasn't just a normal punch. Luffy was actually using Armored Haki in that attack. It doesn't seem like he was using Advanced Armored Haki or even Conqueror's Haki, but still, he was in Gear 5 and threw an Armored Haki punch at Mercury, and he was the one who took damage. So given what we've seen from Mercury in this chapter, I think it's safe to say that his special abilities in his yokai form are both hard skin, hard enough that even Armored Haki can't penetrate it, and the ability to produce fire. And speaking of fire, we get our first real look at the original Mother Flame in this chapter in one of Vegapunk's labs, with Saturn seemingly destroying the equipment around it in this chapter near the end. I'm not exactly sure what his plan was there, because as far as I'm aware, even though they are destroying everything and everyone on the island, they still want to make sure that they keep that safe for their future use. So again, not exactly sure what Saturn was doing in the scene, if that actually is him. It's kind of hard to tell based on how small the character was, if that actually was Saturn or not. It looks like him, but it might not have been. Anyway, we also end up seeing the giant robot once again slowly making his way across the island. And the first time I read the chapter, I kind of just rolled my eyes at the fact that we're once again, for the umpteenth time, seeing the giant robot just slowly making his way across the island without actually doing anything. But after I went back for my second reading, I noticed that on that same page, we get this close-up shot of the Mother Flame beating or resonating with something. And it made me wonder, is this basically a hint as to where the giant robot is actually going? This entire time, I assumed, and I'm sure most people assumed as well, that it was heading towards Luffy because he is Joy Boy and it's resonating with him going into Gear 5. But what if the Mother Flame is what it's resonating with and the giant robot is heading towards the Mother Flame? And there could be any number of reasons as to why it's heading towards its power source. Maybe it plans on using it to fuel itself, or maybe it wants to deliver the flame away from the Gorosei and over to Luffy. There's no telling what it plans on doing, but rest assured, 10 chapters from now when the giant robot finally does something, it will definitely have been worth the wait.